We are here, Charlie. It is me, Jay, and of course it's you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Charlie.
And we've got a very special edition today. We've gone a bit different, haven't we? Because we actually released episode 5 last week, when actually it should have been episode 4. So we got a bit carried away with ourselves. So this is episode 4. What are we going to be talking about today, mate?
Well, today we're going to be talking about my favourite trains and your favourite buses.
Yep, absolutely. And I can see you've got an iPad packed full of notes that you've been researching throughout the day today, which is brilliant. What should we start with, a bus or a train?
I think we should start with a bus.
Okay, I'm going to show you a picture of a bus. Here it is. What do you think?
Think it looks good?
This one is a Leyland Atlantean, and these were very, very popular when I was growing up, and they were in use in Ipswich for an awful long time, replaced though by single-decker buses, because the reality was, or is rather, that you can fit as many people on the single-deckers these days because of the seating configuration and where they've moved the doors and things like that. But this particular one that we're looking at is at the Manchester Museum of Transport. Look at that. And I've got to be honest, Charlie, I don't really like the orange and the brown. I prefer the Ipswich livery, which of course is green and cream. We'll get over to that in a minute. But funny fact on the Leyland Atlantean, do you know Ipswich buses they have an open-top bus?
Yeah.
Well, I believe that it's an open-top bus because they had a fire on the top deck. So rather than get rid of it, they cut the roof off and made it into the open-top bus. Have you been on that one before?
I don't think so, no.
If you see it in the summer, try and hop aboard for the time of your life. Anyway, that's a bus, trading it for one of your trains. So what have you got? What's up next?
Well, this train it was an experimental train built by the Germans. I can't pronounce the German name, but its name translated is Rail Zeppelin.
Ooh.
It was one of the fastest trains of its time, reaching a top speed of 143 miles an hour or 230 kilometres an hour. But it was decided it was far too dangerous because it ran off a giant sharp fan right at the back of it, which was considered too dangerous for crowded platforms.
What? A fan sticking out the back? Is that what you...
Yeah.
Well, that could be disastrous.
The predecessor, the Aero Rail, the predecessor for it that killed quite a few people.
Mm-hmm. My goodness me, killed a few people? But I suppose that was taken out of service, right?
Yes, I can't remember how long it was in service, but only one was built and it got scrapped after being taken out of service.
Well, yeah, goodbye. Well, I can honestly tell you, I don't think anyone's been killed by a Leyland Atlantean, so I don't know who's getting the points for this one, but that train does sound remarkable. I must say, though, Charlie, the top speed of the Leyland Atlantean is coming up here at 42 miles per hour. I don't know if that's actually true. I'm going to question the internet on that, but I think your train's far faster than mine. I've got another bus. Do you want to have a look at this? You're familiar with the Ipswich Transport Museum, aren't you?
Yes.
Well, this one features at the Ipswich Transport Museum. Maybe not this exact one, but this is an AEC Regent 5, built in 1963. And we can see there that has the proper livery, green and cream. And I loved how Ipswich buses, they don't do it now, but they had the orange wheels. I always found that remarkable. That sort of really stuck out to me. But that's the AEC Regent that you could go on when they have an open day at the end of the month. Pretty cool. Over to you for another train, though, Charlie.
Just before I do a train, I know a bus fact. It's buses in the countryside had to be shorter than buses in the city because the bridges were lower.
That's the other thing. That's the other cool thing about single-decker buses, isn't it? Because they can go under all bridges around. Excellent stuff. Thanks, mate. Bus facts there. Lovely.
I think I'll do 2 trains quickly, but one of them is the Class 71, which, if you haven't listened to the previous episode, you'll need to do that to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But the other one I'll do is the NS2000 Atlantic. It was originally designed for mail trains, which were in those days getting heavier and heavier, which I suppose nowadays are getting lighter and lighter with all the technology we have.
Mm-hmm.
It had a top speed of 49, almost 50 miles an hour, otherwise 80 kilometres, and it had an odd wheel configuration of 442, and it was the predecessor of the NS2100, which was a mixed traffic engine.
My goodness me, that's awesome. And can I ask, have you got a model of any of these? Because I know you've got models of trains. Is there any you've got a model of?
Of all the trains I've got, you can only get a model of 3 of them. Of all the trains I've got listed as my favourites.
Well, maybe send a request to those makers out there. Of course, there's Hornby and many others. Of course, it is radio. We should say there are other brands available. Maybe we could send a request to them, say, hey, we think this might be needed. I only ask about models because this one here that we're now looking at, everyone, is the Ipswich Corporation Transport AEC Region 3. And you can see this in the Ipswich Transport Museum as well. Zooming in, you can't quite see that, but that's the number plate. It says ADX1. So that would be the first double-decker bus they had after the trolley buses, effectively. And that is still around today. It's in the Ipswich Transport Museum. Charlie, can I ask you, what do you think? AEC Region 3 or 5? What do you think's the better looking one?
I think the 3 is better looking because the grille on the front is taller and slimmer.
I prefer it. I definitely prefer it. Aside from that, though, very, very similar.
Very similar.
You know, except that I think today we'd call it, if it was a car, I think maybe trains as well, you call it a facelift model. So it's very similar, it's just the front looks a bit different. So anyway, that's another bus. Again, of course, at the Ipswich Transport Museum, which is open soon. What do you got there, Charlie? What's next?
I think, as one just before I get onto my very favourite train, is the DBVT 11.5 Trans-Europe Express train.
Trans-Europe Express. Check it out. Cool song by Kraftwerk. But anyway, let's go.
So these had a top speed of 99 miles an hour or 160 kilometres an hour. There were 19 built and 1 is left in preservation. They were 10 units because they were multiple unit trains, but they did have the ability to connect to one another and create even more units. They weren't all used for the Trans-Europe Express. Some were used for private companies. They were made by Deutsche Bundesbahn, which is very German, as you can tell. And the very cool thing about them is the trains had the ability to run on almost any country's electric voltage.
Oh goodness, we've got a photo of one here. Is that's what we're looking at, right?
Yes.
My goodness, that is quite the train, isn't it? And you say that they could make them faster by sort of doubling up, is that right?
Not necessarily make them faster, but make them longer.
Right.
Because the thing is, they only operated for first-class passengers. So I suppose if there was a big meeting of famous people, might need to get 2 trains going at once.
I see. What an impressive thing that is. What a remarkable train. Look at that. I mean, what a sight that would be. I tell you what, though, the red... Do we call it livery on trains still? Yeah, because we do with buses. So we're noticing a lot of the language crosses over. But I think the red livery of that reminds me very much of the London Route Master. But again, slightly different. We're going to have a look here at the Ipswich versions. And then we go back to London. We can see slightly different grille again. Actually, this might be... no, it's an AEC again. But look at that, 11.3 litre engine. diesel power in London, many of them running at any one time. Oh, it's no wonder there was a problem with pollution back then. Yeah, of course, they've been phased out by the new Route Master, which is much cleaner. And they also had a bendy bus in London, but I don't think that worked very well. But that's mine. I mean, you've been to London before, haven't you, Charlie?
Yeah.
Have you been on one of the London buses?
I've been on both the old Route Masters, as in like the 1950s Route Masters,
yep.
and the ones they had just before the new buses came along.
Ah, I see. Yeah. Those are pretty classic looking as well. I actually had a friend. These aren't actually redundant now. These are used an awful lot for special occasions. I had a friend who got married, and this was effectively the taxi between the church and the reception, and they'd hired a couple of London buses.
Yeah, when I went on one, it was for a special occasion as well. It was a special historic route to Winter Wonderland one year.
Oh.
And a company had about 5 of the Route Master buses running. And we unfortunately didn't get to sit on the top deck, but it was still quite nice sitting on the bottom deck.
Yep, and then when you get on because you get on at the back, don't you?
Yes.
Which is rather bizarre. And of course, there'd have been a conductor there going, "Hey, give me your money, and I'll give you a ticket, and you can." But of course, you get on, and you've got those bench seats immediately, so you face opposite each other. And I love the fact that they're sort of, I think they're leather, or they're such a lovely material. I could go on about buses, so please interject, Charlie. What is the next train you want to talk about?
Well, this is probably my most favourite train.
Okay.
And it's the NS 3800/NS 3700 Potevis.
Okay.
This train was an adaptation of the NS 3700, and it was made to be more streamlined. There were 6 made. But even though they were made to be streamlined, they were actually 5 kilometres slower because the streamlining made them 3.5 tonnes heavier. And the Potevis may seem a bit odd to people because it's from Dutch, which means sperm whale because of the way the front of the train looks.
Have we got a picture of one here, haven't we?
Yes.
God, that is odd, isn't it? Look, this looks like something a fan has put together. But here's an actual picture from WikiWand. Thanks, WikiWand. Is that right? That's the one, isn't it?
Yes, that's the one.
Goodness me.
I don't see why, but it's accused of being one of the most ugliest trains in Europe.
I don't think it's ugly. I don't know. Folks, we'd love you to Google that if you can, so you can have a look. Actually, the artwork for this podcast may indeed feature one of these trains, but it's an acquired taste, I think. Is there anything else you want to add, Charlie, whilst we're on our trains and buses?
As an honourable mention, which we didn't have time to fit in, I would say the NS 100 would have been quite a good train to put in. Okay.
So that's an NS 100. Let's get on that. I think I didn't Google that properly. Let's Google NS 100. Oh, let's put in train. Something else. Oh, that's pretty cool. Whilst that's loading, the Ipswich bus, they had a minibus made by Optare, and it had this horrendous sounding, what I now know to be a prop shaft, effectively. It was sending power to and it was whines like anything. But I went on these as a kid so often that I have a soft spot for them, and now I miss that whining sound of the Optare. What do you think of that? A lot of people think that's an ugly bus. So I guess we're finishing on what people think are ugly buses and trains, but actually to us, they're beautiful. We like them, right? What do you think of this, though? Be honest, Charlie. Be honest.
I don't think it's the best looking bus I've seen, but it's definitely not the worst. And I like how it's got kind of what I would say a 1970s kind of style.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this one that we're looking at, M-Reg, probably mid-90s, but I think the design is certainly not groundbreaking for the time. I tell you what, the gearbox certainly wasn't. I remember that one. On that note, we must say our farewells to everyone. Thank you for listening. Charlie, I'll hand it over to you because it is about you. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before we say goodbye, everybody?
I think that's it for this episode.
Excellent. And we'll see you next week. Is there anything that we can tease people with next week? Is there anything in particular? Or is it going to be a wild card?
I think next week will probably be a surprise wild card.
Well, tune in next week for Wild Card City. Here we go. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.